There is a story that Richard Feynman loved to tell about his father. It was not a story about heroism or wealth or fame. It was a story about a walk in the woods. When Feynman was a small boy, his father would take him into the Catskill Mountains and they would look at birds. Other parents might have said, "Look, that's a brown-throated thrush." But Feynman's father said something different. He said, "Do you see that bird? In Italian, it's called a chuto lapitida. In Portuguese, it's a bom da peda. In Chinese, it's a chunglongta. In Japanese, you would say Katano Takeda. You can know the name of that bird in every language on earth, and when you are done, you will know absolutely nothing about the bird itself. You will only know what humans call it. Now let's watch what it does." And then they would sit silently watching the bird peck at its feathers, fly to a branch, and hunt for insects. That lesson, that the name is not the knowledge, that the thing itself is what matters, became the cornerstone of Feynman's entire philosophy of life and science. And today, we are going to sit with that philosophy. We are going to watch the bird. Richard Feynman was not a motivational speaker. He never stood on a stage in a crisp suit and told you to follow your dreams with a catchy slogan. In fact, he would have hated that. He was a theoretical physicist who won the Nobel Prize for his work on quantum electrodynamics, but he was also a bongo player, a safecracker, an artist, a man who loved to wander into biology departments and ask naive questions just to see what would happen. He was, above all else, a person who refused to take anything on authority. Not his teachers, not the textbooks, not even his own previous beliefs. He wanted to see for himself. And that simple, radical commitment to honesty and curiosity is why, decades after his death, we still turn to his words when we feel lost in a world full of easy answers and comfortable lies. Let me ask you something personal. When was the last time you admitted you were wrong about something important? Not a small thing, not admitting you took the wrong exit on the highway or that you forgot to buy milk. When was the last time you looked at a deeply held belief about yourself, about another person, about how the world works, and said, "I was mistaken"? Feynman believed that this ability, the ability to doubt yourself, to actively seek out your own errors, to celebrate being proven wrong, was the single most important characteristic of an honest mind. He said, "The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool." Think about that. You are the easiest person to fool. Not your enemies, not the politicians, not the advertisers, you, because your brain is wired to protect your ego, to weave stories that make you look good, to remember successes and forget failures. Your own mind is a master of self-deception, and the only defense is a relentless, almost uncomfortable dedication to testing your own ideas against reality. This is not just a principle for physics, this is a principle for life. How many arguments have you had where you were more interested in winning than in finding the truth? How many times have you dismissed someone else's perspective not because you examined it and found it lacking, but because it threatened your identity? Feynman's approach was almost brutal in its simplicity. He would take any idea, no matter how beloved, and turn it upside down. He would ask, "What would have to happen for me to know that this idea is false?" If he could not think of any possible evidence that would change his mind, he knew he was not dealing with science. He was dealing with faith or ideology. And he had no problem with faith in its proper place, but he refused to confuse it with knowledge. One of the most powerful demonstrations of this philosophy came during the investigation of the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster in 1986. Feynman was appointed to the Presidential Commission, and while others pored over complex documents and engineering reports, he did something characteristically simple. He asked for a glass of ice water and a sample of the rubber O-rings that sealed the booster rocket joints. Then, in front of the cameras, he squeezed the rubber with a clamp and dipped it into the ice water. When he pulled it out, the rubber was brittle and took seconds to regain its shape. He had just demonstrated, live on television, that the O-rings lost their elasticity at cold temperatures, exactly the conditions on the morning of the launch. No equations, no jargon, no appeals to authority, just a man, a piece of rubber, and a glass of ice water. That is Feynman's method. Reduce the problem to its simplest form. Ask what you can actually see and touch. Do not let complexity become an excuse for confusion. But Feynman's wisdom went far beyond the laboratory. He had profound things to say about the nature of curiosity itself. He noticed that children are born scientists. A toddler who throws a spoon off the high chair for the 10th time is not being naughty, they are conducting an experiment. Does it always fall down? Does it make the same sound on the tile floor as on the rug? What happens if I drop a cup instead? And then, somewhere along the way, most of us lose that. We start to care more about getting the right answer than about asking the question. We start to fear being wrong. We learn that mistakes are punished, not celebrated. And slowly, the flame of raw, unashamed curiosity gets smothered under layers of embarrassment and anxiety. Feynman refused to let that happen to himself. He once wrote to a former student, "I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned." That is the heart of the curious life. It is not about collecting facts. It is about staying open. It is about being comfortable with uncertainty. Think about the last time you felt truly alive. Not just happy, but deeply electrically engaged with the world. For Feynman, those moments happened most often when he encountered something he did not understand. He loved the feeling of being confused. He called it the most wonderful feeling in the world because it meant he was about to learn something. When he was a graduate student at Princeton, he watched someone throw a dinner plate in the air. The plate spun, wobbled, and had a small red medallion on it that seemed to move faster than the rest of the plate. Any normal person would have shrugged and returned to their dinner. Feynman spent months working out the equations of motion for a wobbling plate. The work led him indirectly to his Nobel Prize-winning theory of quantum electrodynamics, all because he followed a small, silly curiosity about a spinning plate. He did not ask, "Will this be useful?" He did not ask, "Will this make me famous?" He asked only, "Isn't that interesting?" This is the core of Feynman's philosophy of life. Do things for the joy of doing them. Do not worry about the outcome. The outcome will take care of itself. He told a story about a conversation with a friend who said, "Feynman, you're a genius. You must have such a high IQ." And Feynman replied that he had taken an IQ test once and scored 124. Respectable, but not extraordinary. Then he said something remarkable. What matters is not how smart you are. What matters is how you think. I am not afraid to think about something for a long time. I will work on a problem for years if I have to. I will make 100 wrong guesses. I will write down 1,000 stupid ideas, and then finally, one of them works. Most people are too embarrassed to be seen trying. They want to appear brilliant. I just want to understand. That willingness to be stupid, to risk looking foolish, is perhaps the most liberating idea in all of Feynman's writing. How many things have you not tried because you were afraid of looking like a beginner? How many questions have you not asked because you thought everyone else already knew the answer? How many projects have you abandoned because your first attempt was clumsy and imperfect? Feynman would tell you to embrace the clumsiness. He would tell you that the master is just someone who failed more times than you have tried. He would tell you about his time at Los Alamos during the Manhattan Project, where he was much younger than most of the senior physicists. He would open the safes that contained classified documents not because he was a spy, but because he was curious and because he noticed that most people used predictable combinations like birthdays or simple numbers. He would leave notes inside the safe saying, "This is not very secure." And when his colleagues got annoyed, he just laughed. He took nothing seriously except the work itself. He took the science seriously, but he never took himself seriously. This brings us to another essential Feynman lesson, the difference between knowing the name of something and knowing the thing itself. In our modern world, we are drowning in names. We have terms for everything, psychology terms, business terms, relationship terms, political terms, and we often mistake the ability to use these terms for genuine understanding. We say he has a narcissistic personality disorder, as if that sentence explains anything. But Feynman would say, what does he actually do? What does he say? How does he make you feel? The label is just a shortcut. Real understanding lives in the details. When Feynman was asked to serve on a textbook selection committee for California schools, he found that most science textbooks were filled with definitions and vocabulary lists, but almost no actual science. They would define energy as the ability to do work and then move on. There were no experiments, no demonstrations, no invitations to see for yourself. Feynman called this false knowledge. Words that sound like knowledge but are actually hollow. And he worried that we were teaching children to perform knowledge rather than to possess it. How does this apply to your life today? Look at the things you claim to know. Do you really know them, or do you just know their names? Do you know how your car's engine works, or do you just know the word combustion? Do you know why you feel anxious in certain social situations, or do you just know the word social anxiety? Do you know why a particular relationship failed, or do you just have a story about it that makes you the hero? Feynman would challenge you to strip away the labels. He would challenge you to describe the phenomenon itself without jargon, without judgment, without the comforting blanket of ready-made explanations. He would say, watch the bird, not the name of the bird, the bird. Another pillar of Feynman's philosophy was his insistence on intellectual honesty, even when it hurt. He famously said, "You have no responsibility to live up to what other people think you ought to accomplish. I have no responsibility to be like they expect me to be. It's their mistake, not my failing." This is a radical statement in a world that constantly measures us against external standards. Grades, salaries, follower counts, likes, retweets, all of these are names for things that are not the thing itself. The thing itself is the work. The thing itself is the question. The thing itself is the quiet joy of figuring something out for yourself, regardless of whether anyone claps. Feynman turned down many prestigious offers, including a lifetime position at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, where he would have had no teaching duties and infinite time to think. Why did he say no? Because he said the place was too rarefied, too disconnected from the messy, noisy, imperfect world. He preferred to teach freshmen at Caltech. He preferred to eat lunch in the cafeteria with students who asked naive questions. He preferred the chaos of real life to the sterile quiet of pure thought. There is a lesson here about meaning. We often look for meaning in grand achievements, winning awards, getting promoted, being recognized. But Feynman found meaning in the small, daily acts of curiosity. He found meaning in explaining a difficult idea to a beginner and seeing their eyes light up. He found meaning in fixing a broken radio as a teenager, not because he was paid for it, but because he loved the puzzle of tracking down the faulty connection. He found meaning in learning to draw in his 40s, simply because he wanted to see if he could capture the beauty of a flower on paper. And when he did, he noticed something else. He noticed that he started to see the flower differently. He noticed the subtle curves of the petals, the way light passed through them, the delicate structure of the stamen. The drawing did not make him a great artist, but it made him a better observer. And for Feynman, being a better observer was the entire point of being alive. Let me share with you one of his most beautiful passages. He wrote about the death of his first wife, Arlene, who died of tuberculosis when she was only 25. They were young, deeply in love, and her death was a devastating blow. Years later, Feynman wrote that he could still look at a certain tree or a certain corner of a room and feel a wave of sadness. But then he said something extraordinary. He said that the sadness was not a weakness. It was a sign that he had truly loved. And he would rather have the sadness and the love than to have neither. That is the unsentimental yet deeply human wisdom of Richard Feynman. He did not try to airbrush his feelings into something comfortable. He did not pretend that loss did not hurt. He simply observed his own heart with the same honesty he brought to physics, and he accepted that pain is part of the deal. If you want to care about things, you will sometimes hurt. That is not a reason to stop caring. It is the price of admission. So how do you live a life guided by Feynman's philosophy? It is not complicated, but it is difficult. First, cultivate the habit of asking, how could I be wrong about everything that matters? Not once, but repeatedly. Second, follow your small curiosities without asking whether they are productive. Read about something outside your field. Learn a skill you will never use professionally. Wander mentally. Third, strip away jargon and labels. Describe the world in the simplest terms you can. If you cannot explain something to a 12-year-old, you do not really understand it. Fourth, embrace the embarrassment of being a beginner. Let yourself be clumsy. Let yourself ask stupid questions. The stupid question today is the insight tomorrow. Fifth, separate your identity from your beliefs. When someone shows you a flaw in your thinking, treat it as a gift, not an attack. You are not your ideas. You are the process of questioning those ideas. And sixth, remember that the universe does not care about your reputation. It only cares about what is true. And the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, is always more beautiful than any comfortable lie. Richard Feynman died in 1988, but his voice still echoes in every lecture hall, every laboratory, every quiet room where someone sits with a problem they cannot yet solve. He would not want you to worship him. He would not want you to memorize his quotes. He would want you to do what he did, to look closely at the world, to ask your own questions, to make your own mistakes, and to find your own joy in the act of understanding. He would want you to watch the bird, not the name of the bird, the bird. And then maybe to smile and say, "Isn't that interesting?" That is the mind of Richard. That is the only motivation you will ever need.